Alright, so welcome back to the next video. So in the last video I was doing the retopo and I finished the retopo, and let's take a look at that retopo. So this is the retopo of the model. Now, of course, just for the sake of time, I did not finish the horns in the back of the head. Really, I want to just do this to be able to show how you can do the transfer of maps inside of Maya, as well as retopo this. So I do know that I have a couple of incidental holes inside of my mesh that came in from when I was doing the retopo. So they're not a huge deal for me. I can go back and easily fix those. I can use my modeling kit, use my quad draw right now, and shift this closed. So I can come in here and actually close those up. Not a huge thing. Make sure I do the same configuration on this side. So we did the quad in the back. Let's make sure it actually registers. I probably need to turn back on my reference. Well, that would probably help. Or maybe not. It's kind of funky. So there we go. So I've got that kind of closed up, and that's not a huge deal because I'm adding that to the UVs right there. It looks fine, and you can see that U-turn. So this is a U-turn geometry, so it goes straight down, over, back up, and turns back up on itself. A lot of pieces of geometry actually ended up doing that. I've got some things that I probably could reconfigure a little bit different, but overall I am happy with the configuration of this topology. I think there's another hole right here. I'm going to see if there is. No, it's not a hole. We do need to fix that. That's not actually a hole, but it looks like our polygon is flipped the wrong way. So I'm going to select that polygon, go here to polygon set, and go to the normals menu, and I just want to reverse that and make sure. Looks like it's a reversed edge, but it could be fine. Looks like it's okay. And let's just look at vertex and see what's going on up in here. And okay, yeah, nothing's really wrong. And I'm gonna undo that because I'm moving things around without my mesh being on, so that would actually pull things off of my mesh if I did that without the live version being on. So you want to have the live version on so that you don't disconnect them from the other model. So what I want to do is show how to transfer maps. Transfer maps is actually pretty simple. I'm going to make sure that I'm in my rendering set, so I can hit the F5 key on, well, actually F6 on the keyboard for my rendering set. So hitting F6 puts me in rendering set. At this point, I need to turn off my live object. So I'm going to just deactivate my live object and unreference that. So now I can select both of these if I choose to. I can select this one and then this one. So that's good. The other thing that I want to do, I want to actually grab my whole low poly model, select the whole low poly model, and go back in here to polygon set, go to normals, and I want to say soften. By softening my normals, my surface will appear smooth to the lighting. So if I were to quickly render this out, the model looks semi-smooth, as opposed to if I render it, let's undo the soften. So let's render this one, very hard faced and faceted. I've got everything selected. I'm going to come here and go normals and just say soften edge, and then we'll keep this image and render another one. And if we look at those two and compare them, I can see this one here has a lot softer features, and so everything's good. So I don't have to smooth this model. I'm just going to soften it. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm in my rendering set. I'm going to go in here to lighting and shading, and I'm going to go down to transfer maps. And in the transfer map section, what I need to do, one, I'm going to rename this and rename this geometry and call it lady. So inside of my transfer maps, for target mesh, I'm just going to clear all. And for my target mesh, I want to select my low poly model, and I want to say add selected. Now this has already been unwrapped. Now this is the trick to this. You have to unwrap your low polygon model. It has to be unwrapped. So if I look at my UVs in here, if I actually open up my UVs, I'll see that I actually, I probably already had it open. There we go. So if I open up my UV window, you can see my model is laid down, everything's flat, and everything's kind of there, and I'm good. So there's one stray polygon in there. Oh, that's the polygon that I added to the ear. So let's find that sucker. So it looks like the polygons that I added to the ear didn't fall into their UV spaces, and that's fine. This gives me a chance to be able to shrink these guys down and then show you how to weld some UVs if you ever have issues with the UVs not being in place. So I'm just making these a lot smaller, and I should have two triangles sitting on top of each other as well. So those guys are sitting there. So those are the pieces that these are the pieces that I just added on the side of the head on both sides. So it's not a big deal, because the only thing I got to do is come in here, and I'm going to go to edge mode, select the edge, and inside of Maya, this should show me the edge that this belongs to. And looks like it's trying to be fickle. I can go ahead and do this. I can come in here and say that I want to move and sew it. It looks like it's not a part of that. So it's not a huge deal. Just so we don't mess up having to go through this, I'm just going to take these couple of UVs and set them to the side. They're not going to really screw up anything. The calculation in the area where those UVs belong to will be a little bit screwy because they were not part of the original unwrap. So that's not a huge issue. Still can show how to get this done. So the next thing I want to do is in my transfer maps, I want to come in here and go to source mesh. The source mesh is going to be the model that I'm coming from. So I'm going to select my high poly model and say add selected. And you know what? I don't think it's going to add it because this is a cache. So it's probably not going to add that model. Let's see. Not a huge deal. Because really, so that model does not live inside of doesn't live inside of Maya. So let's see if it'll let me select it. And it keeps wanting to select the other model. Let's just make sure. Yeah, so it doesn't want to load. It doesn't want to actually let me use that model because I'm not actually using that model. I'm using a GPU cache of that model. So not a huge deal. What I will do is I can delete my cache out and actually just import my real model back in here. So it's not a big thing. And import this in. So I'm not gonna, when it imports back in, it's not gonna be the cache of it anymore, because that, before we were using the GPU cache. I'm gonna actually import the Alembic file back into Maya. So let's give it a second, and I'll pause this while this is loading in. So that's actually one of the powers of being able to use that Alembic file. So I was actually able to save a lot of time by saving out the Alembic file or the ABC file earlier and then load it back in as a GPU cache. And then now I can actually import that file back in and be able to use it as just a regular piece of geometry. So when you do the transfer of maps, you have to have just a standard loaded piece of geometry. You can, it looks like it won't let you do the baking when you have the cache. So this is all you have to have. Your low poly model, your retopo model has to be unwrapped. You want to make sure they're still on top of each other like they were before. And your target mesh will go, and that's going to be your low poly. So your target mesh is your low poly. And then your source mesh is going to be your high poly mesh. And then from there, you need to choose which maps that you want to output. I'm going to do a normal map right now. So I'm going to do normal, and I'm going to come here to normal map, and I'm going to choose where I want this map to save to. And I want my map to save on the desktop, and I want it to save. I'm just going to choose, like, let's do a TIFF or a target. Let's just do a target, and let's call this female underscore normals, and save it. And from that point, you can see right here, I'm saving a normal map off, and it says connect output maps. So once it's done baking, it will actually connect the new maps to a shader and then apply it to my model. I'm going to do this. I'm going to bake this with Mental Ray. So I want to open up the Mental Ray slot, and I want to bake this as a 2048 texture. So I'm going to type in 2048 and just hit enter, and it'll change both of the map. It'll keep it square. So because keep aspect ratio is turned on, it's going to keep the map width and the map height square. So that's all good. So everything else is fine. Look at advanced options. I'm not going to touch anything in here, not going to mess with anything. So let's go into my actual render settings and make sure that I have chosen Mental Ray as my renderer. And what I want to do at this point is just say bake and let it bake out. So give it some time. It's going to take a little bit of time for it to bake. At this point, what Maya is doing, Maya is actually using the two models. Because the two models are sitting on top of each other, Maya is using the distance between those two models to trace a ray between the high poly surface and the low poly surface. As that ray bounces back and forth between those two surfaces, that's how I'm getting my normals to come out to be able to apply to the low polygon model. So sometimes this can take a little bit of time. So I would suggest not getting crazy and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. Just let it bake out. And it baked out. My baking is done. It's complete. I'm going to select the high poly model, and I'm just going to hide it. So I'm going to hit Control H and hide it. And I'll be left with my low poly model. And if I hit 6 on the keyboard, if I hit 6, you can see my textures, and I look like I had a little bit of errors, and these errors happened because my low poly model was probably sitting a little too far into the high poly model. But I can see my normals from my high poly are actually applied to this, and I probably need to turn up some of my baking settings as well. But my high poly is applied to this, and it did a decent job for this. So I could come back in here and actually rebake this. And rebake these two. So what I want to do is I'm going to turn up my baking just a little bit, and let's say we want to use those. And then right now you'll see Final Gather is being used with this, and I'm going to use a surface direction front. That keep aspect ratio good. Tangent space, yes. Include materials, sure. And looks like maybe let's turn the search up just a little bit. So I'm gonna say like 0.2 for the search envelope percentage. And max trace depth right now is set to 0. I'm gonna make that just a little bit larger and do like 0.0, so 0.0020. And I just want to do this so I can look at this and see what's happening. And it doesn't matter if this is hidden right now, because it's using the two meshes that are actually loaded in here to bake out all this stuff. So I'm gonna say bake again and let it bake again. It took, I think, probably about 4 or 5, maybe a minute or two to bake the first time. So let's bake it again. and see what our results look like. And the only thing we've done at this point is we've tweaked a little bit of the search parameters to see if we can get a better result, because everything did okay except for that top shoulder. The top shoulder didn't really bake as well as I would want it to. So I want to try to get a little bit better bake on that. You can see that this is a texture applied on this, and I did this on purpose. I normally would not cut my seam right here and have it showing so much, but you can see that it actually is a texture map on this, and it looks like that bakes a little bit muddier. So let's drop this back down to 0. It's probably because of the percentage. Let's do like, let's rebake. So the nice thing about it is you can bake this over and over and over and basically tweak your settings until you get a bake where you want it. Now some people actually use XNormals. XNormals does the same thing. With XNormals, you basically end up doing sort of the same thing. You load up both of your models and then you tell it to bake, and that's kind of it. So just keep that in mind. It's not a huge thing. So, you know, and this bake looks a little bit better. So this bake here actually looks a little bit better. I still just think I've got some pieces that are internal on my bake, and I just need to be able to clean that up a little bit. But this bake is actually a lot better. I still have that issue right there. So let's see. Let's see if I were to do this at like 0.1. Let's do it again. So let's bake it again. So you can keep baking this to get the to kind of get it where you want it. The other part of this is if you had texture. So let's say if you had a diffuse texture. So if you've already poly painted this and you have a texture for it, you can actually take the texture from this and be able to apply texture. You do texture the same way. You would add that diffuse texture, save it somewhere, and it would actually output your diffuse and your normals and your displacements or whatever maps you needed. But realistically, what you could do once you have retopoed this mesh, once you've unwrapped it, and then once you have gotten your normals off of this, you can take these normals and take this model back into ZBrush and then paint on it. So you don't have to, you can use whatever painting program you want to at that point. And looks like this is getting a little bit better. I'm gonna say 0.8 and bake and see what it does. So it's a little bit of guessing, because you see your mesh. Now you can change the display of this and be able to see the envelope and do a better job of calculating what you're seeing. I already know that working from 0, because that's the percentage that is left at from the very beginning, it's just left completely at 0. I know by going up a couple of tenths on my bake that I can kind of find that sweet spot and get a decent bake. And let's see what this bake's going to give me. Oh, that's opening up the shell too much. So you can do this. You can see your envelope. So if I do this, you can see how it's calculating. And let's say 0.1 here. And let's see, there's the mesh. Let's see both at the same time. So it looks like what might be happening with my model is that I actually have some unwelded vertices in here. So you definitely want to make sure you welded all your vertices and everything else. And it looks like it's a decent space between there. So like 0.2. Let's try to push it a little bit more and do maybe 0.3. and that looks okay. It's not like it's bulging up or blowing out or anything. That looks okay. So let's try baking that. Really, what I'm worried about is the shoulder. I mean, it's just a little bit of an issue with the shoulder right there. So we'll bake it again. So, but anyway, you can use things like XNormals and be able to do the same type of thing. With XNormals, it's kind of nice because you do not have to worry about those models being on top of each other for the bake to happen, because the program basically zeroes out everything to 0, 0, and then it does the kind of does the calculation for you for the most part. It does an okay job at it. And looks like that's the best I'm gonna get with this. Now you do have to remember, when I was building this model, when I did the retopo, I was not able. There is no mirroring function with retopo inside of 2015. Now, from what I've heard, 2016 does have a retopo function inside of the program that lets you do. It actually will let you do a mirrored version when you're doing retopo, and that's honestly the best thing, because you want to make sure that your retopo is sticking down to your mesh. So it looks like right over here. Oh, you know what? I take all of that back. It is not the search parameters. Aha. I know exactly what it is now on my model. It's not, so everything is right. So I can put this back down to 0, because everything actually is right at 0. What we're seeing, that black spot we're seeing on our low poly mesh, is this tentacle. Because there's no geometry, I didn't create geometry for the tentacle. So, if you look back at this, I just went back through and got the actual head and the high poly and everything else. I didn't add the tentacle. So when it's tracing from that high poly character, it's actually tracing the occlusion from the tentacle that does not exist on the low poly character. So that's what that is. So it's actually not an error. It's actually did it right the first time. So if I'm gonna put everything back down to 0 and leave it that way, that's why it's always good to check. You got to check out everything, make sure. Sometimes you'll make a mistake, and that was clearly a mistake because I forgot about the tentacles. So the tentacle is what was giving us that little bit of issue with the normals. The normals are the normals are okay. I would probably still take this model back into ZBrush, paint the color on it, and be done with it. Right now it's at low poly. The one thing I would say inside of ZBrush, if you're going to use ZBrush as your painting program, once you've outputted your final model, so once you have outputted your low poly model, when you're inside of ZBrush or something like that to paint, do not change your topology. This is the topology that you're going to output to game. This is the topology that you're going to take out with you. So you can see right now, this is the low poly version. If I come in here and look at wireframe, I'll look at wireframe on shaded, and you can see this is our low poly. This is actually our low poly version of this character. So this is the one that you want to kind of leave alone. You do not want to touch or move around or sculpt on this. So when you bring this into ZBrush, and maybe I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll show how to bring this into ZBrush. So I'm going to come here and actually go into ZBrush. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I bring this in and import it, and I only paint texture on it. I do not want to change the topology. If I change the topology, there was no point in retopologizing my model in the first place, because I've already got my model set up the way that I want to, and everything should be good. So do not change the topology. So do not sculpt on your character. You can paint on it, but don't sculpt on it. So I would say, be very careful to not start to sculpt on your model. You only want to paint your model, and I'll show you how you can make sure you're only painting on your model. So it's actually pretty simple. It's not that hard. And okay, yeah, quick saves, sure, 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 ZBrush, whatever you say. So that's there. So when I do this, what I want to do is hit Control N because I made a marquee mark on that. So I want to come in here and I want to load in a tool, and I'm just going to go in here to my desktop. So let's go to desktop, and I'm going to go into my folder. Actually, we're not going to get a Z tool because it's not a Z tool yet. I want to import it. So I want to import my model. Sorry about that. I want to make sure I import my model. And I'm importing. It's not. Oh, that's right. ZBrush doesn't like to import by default. It doesn't like to import FBox files. So I can use the plugin script. So you'll see right here, I've got Z plugin, and I'll say FBX importer exporter. I want to say I want to import, and I'll do the same thing. Because I forgot, inside of Maya, I'm used to using FBX files. FBX files are probably one of the better file formats to use when it actually comes to exchanging files between programs. I don't know why ZBrush doesn't natively support it, which makes no sense to me. So I need to make sure I export her out. So I'm going to go here and go File and say Export Selection. And I want to export out as an FBox file, and I'm going to say this is going to be woman paint. And this is an FBX file. You can do OBJ if you choose to. I just prefer the FBX file format because FBX files actually take animation with them. They take lights, they take cameras. You can embed media into a FBX file, so they're a more versatile file format. So let's go back to ZBrush, and I'm going to go in here to my Z plugin, and I'm going to say import, and let's get our model. It's going to go here to the folder. I'm going to get woman paint, and she should have been imported. There she is. So she's in there as a tool, and I'm going to come in here and drag her out, and there she comes. She comes in as a tool, and she is in there with the tool. So she is in there. So the other thing that I want to do is I actually want to load in a texture. So I'm going to go texture, and there's her normals. So I'm going to click on her normals, and I don't know why her normals are not displaying on her. Oh, sometimes you gotta hate ZBrush, right? So let's turn off edit mode, clear that, and make sure we import her again. So import her. Make sure you hit T or hit edit so that you can be working with your real 3D model at this point. And looks like everything's okay. And there's my madcaps, my materials, so I can look at my materials on her. Everything's fine. And a normal should be there on her as well. So when I'm painting in here, make sure you turn off Z-Add and you're only turning on either mRGB, RGB, or M. mRGB is material, red, green, and blue. Or you can choose RGB and actually just paint color on your model. So you can actually come in here and just paint color onto your model. And it's using that texture I have. Let's turn off the texture. So if I go in here and get like a color, I can go in here and paint with a color on my model. Or I can paint with a material. So I can actually paint a material. I can choose a material and paint with. And actually, before we even do any of that painting, make sure you come here and you just choose to fill your object. So now my object's filled. So now when I choose a different color to paint with, there we go. So make sure you fill objects. So go to your color panel and this fill object. And now when you go to paint, you can see your painting on your model. So I can go in here and paint on my model. So I can go paint all the things that I want to paint on my model, and everything is gouda. And yeah, realistically, that's it. The only thing I want to be able to do at this point is continue painting. And from the last video that we went through, you can do your poly painting and just paint on your model. And when you're done, just export those textures out, and that's it. So you can come in here and paint your information on your model, and then just export the maps out. You don't need to export out the model again because you already have that model. Just export out your maps and you're good. That's really it. So I hope this video has been very helpful. We've gone through the retopology process and through the transfer of maps process, so everything should be good. And as they say, happy modeling. I will see you all later, my digital mutants. Until next time, I am Dr. Media.